A very good afternoon and evening to everyone. Hope you're all feeling great. Welcome back to the MBIOS webinar series. I'm Shane Hui and I will be your host for today. So the structure of today's session will be a 5 minutes introduction from myself, a 30 minutes presentation from our speaker, Dr. Shimasaki, and lastly, a 20 minutes of open discussion and Q&A session. We will pick the questions from the chat section, so please drop your questions. Everyone needs to keep your mic muted during the presentation, but the chat function will always be available. You are encouraged to turn on your camera so that the session is more interactive, but that is an optional choice. During the open discussion and Q&A session, you are allowed to raise your hands to get the permission to unmute your mic to ask questions. With the theme of Bio-Entrepreneur 101, today we will be exploring an alternative path of working as an entrepreneur with a science background. To kick things off, here's a short introduction of our speaker for today, Dr. Shimasaki, who is the co-founder and CEO of Molecular Labs, a neuroimmunology precision medicine company focused on diagnosing neuropsychiatric and behavioral disorders triggered by the autoimmune response. He is also the founder of BioSource Consulting Group. Dr. Shimasaki has over 35 years of biotechnology industry experience, starting his career at GeneTech. He is a serial entrepreneur, a scientist co-founding 9 companies who is involved in raising over 30 million USD for these companies and participated in taking 5 companies public to the US and the Canadian stock markets. His research and development work include epitope mapping for the HIV vaccine, SNP-based genetic breast cancer risk prediction biomarkers, a rapid influenza diagnostic, and therapeutic and biological products for infectious diseases and neuropsychiatric disorders. He has led multiple products through the FDA approval process and is also the co-inventor on several patents. Dr. Shimasaki received his Bachelor in Science in Biochemistry from the University of California at Davis, his PhD in Molecular Biology from the University of Tulsa, and his MBA from Northwestern University Kellogg School of Business. He is an adjunct professor and senior entrepreneur in residence at the University of Oklahoma Price School of Business and teaches biotechnology entrepreneurship. Dr. Shimasaki has authored and edited 3 books. The first book, The Business of Bioscience, What Goes into Making a Biotechnology Product. The second book, Biotechnology Entrepreneurship, Starting, Managing, and Leading Biotech Companies. And the second edition, Biotechnology Entrepreneurship, Leading, Managing, and Commercializing Innovative Products. His passion is to help translate scientific and medical discoveries into acutely needed products so that more patients can live healthier lives. So now, let us welcome our speaker, Dr. Shimasaki. Over to you, Dr. Shimasaki.
Very good. Thank you, Shane. Can you hear me okay here from this side?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Well, good morning on my side and good afternoon, good evening to some of you. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you. What I would like to do is to share with you a little bit about biotechnology entrepreneurship, more specifically a few things about my journey and then some advice. Let me share the second slide here. As I mentioned, what I would like to do here is just briefly share with you a little bit about my startup experience. And how I became an entrepreneur in the life science, but it wasn't something that I intended to do in the very beginning, but it's something that I ended up doing quite frequently. And then the second thing I'd like to do is to give you a little bit of advice and share with you some important concepts about things that bio-entrepreneurs should know. In this short period of time, it won't be really detailed, but there will be some things I think that might be important for you to understand. And then there are a couple of things that people make mistakes and think about when they think about biotechnology and entrepreneurship. And I'd like to share just briefly a couple of things. And then I'll also share with you some of the career opportunities that can be had for those with science degrees. And there are a variety of things. Many people think that the only thing you can do is either go into academia or teach. But that's not actually true. There are a very large number of career options for those with scientific backgrounds. So with that, let me share a little bit about myself and how I grew up. It is very important that people understand what it is that they enjoy doing from the beginning. So as I was growing up, I had a curiosity about understanding how things worked. So I tended to take apart things and try to find out how they worked, including my mother's toaster and her iron. Now, the interesting thing is you can always figure out these things, but sometimes you can't put them all back together. But my family kind of allowed that, and it was things that I began to really understand the importance of finding out how things worked. And I think this is an important concept, is one, you have to have a curiosity about things, and the other is to learn how things work. Because if you learn how things work, you can actually begin to use them in different ways. So people think the life science entrepreneurial journey looks like this, where you actually go ahead and plan something. I'm going to pull my laser pointer here. And this path here is, you're going to start here and you're going to end up at this location. But what happens in reality looks something really more like this. You have detours, you have roadblocks, you have things that come along the way. You have to raise money, you have differences with maybe relationships with people who have differences in ideas. So it's important to remember that it's not something that is really as straightforward as people think. This is sort of another analogy here, but it's actually the career path. So people think, well, I'm going to go do this and I'll end up accomplishing this. Well, as far as my career path, I didn't really even know at the point when I started in science what entrepreneur actually meant. So I wasn't even familiar with it, didn't even know how to spell it. And my career path actually looked something more like this. The thing that was important was that I tended to continue to follow my interests, things that I was always interested in, things that I really enjoyed, things that I was passionate about. I actually started out as a music major. And so I studied classical guitar and music and conducting and piano. And I went to California Baptist University and then continued music for about 3.5 years. And then at some point, I really realized as I was working in a hospital, I enjoyed science more than actually maybe having a career of either playing in a symphony or teaching. And therefore, I went back to school to change my major. And I went to the University of California at Davis and studied biochemistry through the influence of some doctors and some physicians and work I did in the pharmacy and in the hospital. And then I actually serendipitously got a job at Genentech, which was at that time a very, very small company in the South San Francisco Bay Area. I originally was looking for a job at a much, much larger company called SIVA, which I don't believe is even still existent. But this small company called Genentech was actually more interested in my background. And so I began to work there and was hired there. And it was when the HIV broke out, and actually began working in the process research and development group on GP120 vaccine. I was then recruited by a colleague from Genentech to Oklahoma, which is in the middle of the country. And what they said was they wanted to start up a biotech company in the middle of the country and wanted me to start up and build the biochemistry department. The colleague that recruited me was the one that worked with me at Genentech on one of the in the formulation department. And so he said, also, what I can do is finish my PhD, which is what I wanted to do. So I moved from South San Francisco area to Tulsa in Oklahoma and worked on my PhD in molecular biology and biotechnology. Took about 8 years to complete it while I worked full time. And that time we started a company called Zymetex, and that company ended up being taken public. We developed one of the first rapid flu diagnostic tests. And then I was working in the biochemistry department there. At that time, the company actually was delisted from the NASDAQ, and the company itself did not survive. But in between that time, a colleague actually was going to close another company, and they were working on breast cancer risk assessment. And so they asked me if I would be interested in leading that company. Before that, I had not led a company and I was not CEO. I did take over the CEO job and began to learn how to raise capital. And then we went and finished the test, began to work through the FDA. Test actually came onto the market. But at that time, there was a change in leadership and the investors took that over. And the company itself then began to have challenges with reimbursement when the laws changed. During that time, I actually was able to go into business school. So I flew back and forth to Chicago for every other weekend for 2 years and studied and got my MBA because I realized I really enjoyed business. So through that, I had co-founded many other companies, one that's based in Grenoble, France, another one that is now called Lexigene that is now publicly traded. These were the inception ideas where we licensed technology from universities. We built a business plan, pulled together a management team, and put people in place. Another company called Isotropic that is doing 360 3D CT breast imaging licensed from the University of California at Davis. Another company that is in the Canadian Stock Exchange called Lexington Biosciences that was licensed from the University of Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. Another one called Imogen that we licensed from Lawrence Livermore National Labs also. And then 2 more companies, one that's called Quartergenic is a startup company that's based in Rhode Island and now Washington, D.C. And through it all, I had a consulting company that we spun these companies out. So what that to say is many of these things, as I'll mention, came serendipitously, meaning they were through contacts that people came in contact with me or I came in contact with them and ideas started up. I want to share with you briefly a little bit more detail about one company. This one is the one that I'm actually leading full-time as a co-founder and a CEO, and we call it Molecular Labs. So I started the company with my co-founder, Dr. Madeline Cunningham, after she came to me and said, how do we help these patients from this clinical study? So the company itself is a precision medicine diagnostic company that we identify autoimmune-based neuropsychiatric disorders. So let me briefly share with you a little bit about that. So there are almost 800 million individuals in the world who suffer from various neuropsychiatric and behavioral disorders. They could be autism, schizophrenia, bipolar, chronic depression, mood disorders, eating disorders, a condition called pandas and pans, anxiety disorder, Tourette's, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all diagnosed based on symptoms, when in fact, many of these conditions actually have an underlying infection-triggered autoimmune root. So what we find out and what we know is that everybody gets infections. Everybody makes antibodies against these infections. But in some people, the antibodies that they make actually cross-react with different parts of their body. And we call that process molecular mimicry, when a part of their body is very similar to a part of the organism, and the person makes antibodies against that particular part. Well, in these cases, they resemble parts of the brain, and they interrupt brain function, and they trigger these different types of neurologic, psychiatric, and behavioral symptoms. But unfortunately, all of these patients get put on neuropsychiatric medications. And so they're treating symptoms, rather than the underlying root disorder. In this case, it's an immune dysfunction. So what we set up was a panel of diagnostic tests that look at different targets in the brain, dopamine D1, D2, lysoganglioside tubulin, and a cell stimulation activity for this calmodulin calcam kinase activity in the brain. What we find is that patients who are positive can be treated for the infection, the immune system, and they become remarkably well. So we now have tested over 12,000 patients in over 30 different countries, and we have generated over 9 million in cumulative revenue on a $6.5 million raise. This is Adam, one of hundreds and thousands of patients. He was diagnosed with ADD, possibly autism. They were going to put him in an institution. We tested him, he was treated, and his mom sent this picture showing him run cross country in school. He said recovery is possible. He's 10,000 times better. So that's the impact of what biotechnology can do. This particular test would not have been available had we not begun the company, had we not actually raised the money and built the company, built the laboratory, and done all of these things. So now let me give you some advice and a little bit of important concepts for you to think about. People think, well, all the things you can do really with a science career is go either into teaching or academia. Well, of course, we talked about bio-entrepreneurship, but that's not the only thing. So in my book called Biotechnology, Entrepreneurship, Leading, Managing, and Commercializing Innovative Technologies, this is the book here. One of my contributors is Toby Friedman. Chapter 40, she wrote about diverse career opportunities in biotechnology and life science industry. So you can see that you can go into research and development in the government. There are nonprofits who are looking for scientists. You can go into discovery research, the pharmaceutical side, project management, clinical development. If you're interested in more in regulatory affairs, medical affairs, there are those who like more of business. You can go into business corporate development in the science side. Many people actually go into the marketing and sales side because they have a science background and they're able to talk to doctors and nurses. You can go into the product development. Some PhDs or scientists go into communications where they do scientific publications or scientific writing or press releases. Others go into operations or manufacturing where they like more of the process side or the quality control side or the engineering. Some go into consulting, into different consulting areas and consulting companies that are science-based. Others go into finance, into venture capital with backgrounds, and of course, entrepreneurship. Others with a combined law degree can go into patents, and then others go into human resources. So there are a wide variety of career options. In this book here, Toby actually has written much more detail about these specific areas. It's called Career Opportunities in Biotechnology and Drug Development. So you can either read the chapter in my book, or she has an entire book devoted to that subject. So I want you to think about this because you're all interested in the life science area, bioscience. This is one of the most highly regulated industries in the world. We have the FDA, we have different types of regulatory agencies in different organizations or different countries. The time to develop a product can be anywhere from 5 to 15 years. That's a long time. And it requires a large amount of capital over a long period of time, anywhere from 25 million to hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you think about it, this is the only market in which the prescriber, the doctor, doesn't use the product, the user, who's usually the patient, doesn't pay for it, and the one who pays for it, at least in the United States, doesn't use it either. It also comes with biological uncertainty, And you have to have a multidisciplinary team to actually get these products developed. There is an extremely high failure rate, but the products that are developed produce life-saving impact on millions and millions of people. So this is the life science industry that you're in. And one thing that you need to remember, if you go into life science business, that you're combining business with biology. And when you combine business with biology, what you create is a business of uncertainty, because we don't know all that we know about biology. We don't know what we know enough about infectious diseases or about immunology or about neurology. So what you have to realize is a biotechnology really is a business of uncertainty. And you, if you are starting one, have to remember that you're a risk manager, that you're basically managing the risk of the biology and you're managing the risks of the business. And you can't forget that you have to manage both of those things. Now, let me share with you a couple other concepts here. Most people think that starting a company is this pathway where you have an idea, you get some money, and then you go commercialize your product. That can work if you're doing things that have to do with consumer products. But in the biotech industry, there's a lot of other things that go on. And specifically, like this caption here says, I think we have to be more specific here in this step, because there has to be a miracle that occurs, because you have to not only raise lots of money, but you have to get people interested in what you're doing, and it has to work. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, and I'm going to let you take a look at this next slide. Some of you might have seen this slide before, and I really want you to look at this picture and see what you see in the picture. Most people will see a woman in this picture, and people will see a younger woman. Some people will see an older woman. I think the important thing is to remember that, one, everybody is looking at the same data. So everybody is looking at the same data. If you're looking at it and you see the older woman, and if you haven't seen it, this is the older woman's mouth. This is her nose. This is her eyes. This is her hair. This is her chin. If you're looking at this and you see a younger woman, this is the younger woman's chin. This is the younger woman's nose. This is the younger woman's eyelash, and she's looking this direction. The older woman is looking this direction. And the important thing is, what do you see? Do you instinctively see problems or solutions? Most people, when they look at something, they see problems. Entrepreneurs look at things and they see opportunities. One of the things to do as an entrepreneur, if that's what you're looking to do, is to learn to see not just the problems. Problems are important, but make sure that you also see an opportunity for a solution. So in other words, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to learn to be a problem solver. And that is an important aspect, because people will pay you to solve problems. The better you are at solving problems, the more people are going to be paying you. So be very pragmatic, or be very purposeful, not just to see a problem, but to see opportunities and solutions. The next piece of advice is to learn to take advantage of serendipity. Some people call that luck. Some people call that good fortune. It's just coincidences in life that people take advantage of. Sometimes people don't take advantage of them, and often a lot of people don't. So I want to use the example of Alexander Fleming. You may know that Alexander Fleming was a brilliant researcher who studied staphylococci, but he kept an untidy laboratory, and he stacked cultures and went on vacation for a month. And so in September, when he returned, he found that his cultures were contaminated with fungus. So normally he might have just thrown those out, but he actually asked the question, why were the bacteria around the fungus cleared because of the mold? And of course, what we know is that was the secretion or the excretion of penicillin or mycotoxin that killed the bacteria, which ultimately became the antibiotic that's helped really millions of people. So the important lesson is always be observant and think about problems and solutions, but look at these opportunities. One more piece of advice is have perseverance and don't give up. So this is a venture capital company, and this company is over 100 years old. They have over 115 IPOs, over 1.6 billion in their current fund. They have 45 very smart investment professionals. They have invested in so many companies. They have what they call an anti-portfolio. And these are the companies that they turn down, and sometimes more than once. You might have heard of some of these companies over the years. The companies that they turn down are Apple Computer, eBay, Cisco Systems, PayPal, FedEx, Google, Intel, Lotus, Kayak, and even Tesla. So the point here is that if these entrepreneurs gave up because they got turned down by a very, very smart group of people, they wouldn't be in existence today. So perseverance is important. A couple more things. Imagination is important. And Albert Einstein was quoted as saying, imagination is more important than knowledge. And what he meant was that because imagination allows you to see beyond what you know, and this is what he actually spent a lot of time, 7 years in the patent office, learning and listening and reading ideas of people. So remember that imagination is very important. It is based on knowledge, but you have to be a creative thinker. One last thing is that you need to constantly share and refine your vision. So when you see something, you imagine something, this is what an entrepreneur does. He explains or she explains what it is that they see and what they want to do. And many of you may or may not know Maurice and Emile. You may not have read about them, but these were engineers and an architect who proposed a structure for the World Fair. They tried to convince their boss to build it, but their boss thought it was a terrible idea, didn't like it. Finally, after a year, they convinced their boss, whose name was Gustav Eiffel, that this would be a great thing to do. And finally, after all the convincing, they began to develop and build the plans. Well, this is what we do with a company. But as they built the plans and they began to start the structure, they found they ran into problems. Problems where the land was not strong enough, or the land was not sturdy enough. So they had to get engineers to figure out how to build such a structure on that land. They began building it, but then they ran out of money. They ran out of money and they had to go find a way to get people to support them. And they began sharing their vision. And people began to then see what they wanted. One of the things then that emerged was this structure that is one of the most well-recognized structure in the world. What people don't realize is they were going to tear it down because it was never intended to stay up there forever. And people thought it was an ugly structure after time. What they found was during the war, they could put an antenna on the top of it and they could intercept the signals from countries in far, far locations. And that's what preserved it to this day. And they began renovating it, and now is one of the most recognized structures in the world. The point is that this began in the mind and in the heart of two individuals many, many years before anything ever existed. And it was through the perseverance, the serendipity, the sharing of the vision, and the raising of the capital that it exists today. So in conclusion, I want to wish you the best of success on your journey. And as my doctor, when I was working in the hospital, would tell me, shoot for the moon. It's better to get halfway there than to aim for the light bulb and never get off the ground. I also have a couple of resources, as was mentioned. The first edition is probably no longer available, but the second edition, which is this lighter cover here called Biotechnology Entrepreneurship, that's available on Amazon. The Business of Bioscience, What Goes into Making a Biotechnology Product, is one that's also available. Also on my consulting website, I have a number of articles and LinkedIn articles. And that will conclude my talk for today, but I wanted to be able to share with you a little bit about my background and then also giving you some advice about your future and some career options. So thank you for your time and attention, and I would take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Dr. Shimasaki, for the amazing session. I've personally learned a lot from you, and I believe the audience felt the same too. So I think right now we will continue with our Q&A session. And let me see what other questions in the chat. So there's a question from Zi. She asked, you term it treatment instead of cure. Does that mean by targeting the root of the problem, it wouldn't cure the disorders, but only treat them? Then what's the advantage of this treatment?
Yes. So cure is a very interesting word that sometimes is reserved for cases in which you really know what's going on. That's a good observation, because although we would say that these patients are cured, what we find is that in some instances they might relapse. The good thing is they know how to treat them again, that they actually get better. So for instance, they might have had autism. They no longer have autism because they have been treated appropriately. Some might call that a cure, but we tend to reserve that even in cancer treatment. Patients who are no longer have cancer, they don't always call that a cure. They call it that they're in remission. But yes, it's an important term. Clearly, cure is a very powerful term, and we like to use that. But the important thing, as you mentioned in the question, is targeting the root of a problem. So when you treat symptoms, you're only going to get symptomatic relief. Let me use a very terrible sort of example. If a person comes in with a tumor in their brain and they have got a headache, and the doctor gives them 2 Advil, and then the patient says, what do I do when the pain comes back? Take 2 more Advil. Well, you might be treating a symptom, but you're not treating the root of the problem. And so this is why it's very important, because medicine is looking for underlying root solutions to the problems. And if you can find them, you actually have a potential product that can be successful.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. And she also asked that, is there a time when you have spent a lot of cost, time, and effort on a publication of a new treatment but failed? How did you face this difficulty?
Yes, so a lot of time, cost, and effort on a publication. Yes. And what was the rest of it? Did it fail?
Yeah, like you spend a lot of effort on a publication, but it failed. So how did you face this difficulty?
Yes.
So
yes.
it's like while you are trying to it's like sorry, I'll read the question again. Is there a time when you have spent a lot of cost, time, and effort on a publication of a new treatment but failed? How did you face this difficulty?
Yes, and that's a really good question. And I think the time and effort on the development of a treatment, or on the development of a diagnostic, or on the development of a medical device, or any of those things, the vast majority of these things that we work on do not work in the way that we intended them. Now, what you do, and you typically do, and this is how you end up, is you don't throw it away. You look for what are the things that it did do. What are the things that it actually did do? And then you leverage those things, and it leads to new information into something that does work. Maybe it doesn't treat what you originally thought, but it does treat something that it is important. So for instance, there are drugs that have been used for cancer, like those that kill B cells. What they found is that it works in these patients that we've talked about because the B cells are producing the antibodies. So they use that in the patients that are severely ill with these autoimmune conditions, and it wipes out the antibody producing cells. So there are other uses or other advantages when you understand what the root is. But I would say that a very large portion of these things that we start on have not worked in the way that we thought that they would in the beginning. The difference is, what do you do with it? Do you just quit, or do you look for deeper, what are the things that it did do, and how do you reposition it in order to make it successful? And we have done that many times.
Yeah, and I think there's like also something related. So there's a question asking, one of your advices is to not give up easily, but is there any time we should think of giving up and move on instead? How do we know when to give up?
Yes. So it is also a very good question. And some of this is there's a difference in discouragement when you're just discouraged and you're tired and you're frustrated and give up, or you give up because you've tried every pathway that you can think of and everything has not worked. What I would say is, you don't give up because you're discouraged, and don't give up because it's not working as quickly or as easily as you thought. As long as you believe in what you're doing and you believe that it has value and you have seen evidence that it has value, ultimately those are the things that will work in some way. Now, if it was easy, obviously everybody would do it. And what really entrepreneurs do is they bring things into being that never existed before. So one of the things is to separate being discouraged or tired or frustrated from something that is proven over again that it doesn't work, and you've tried every way that not only can you think of, but that you've got advice from other people to help. Now, one of the things to separate from advice from other people, if you remember the slide I showed you of the very smart investment people who turned down all those well-known companies, just because somebody says, hey, that won't work, that doesn't mean that it's true. So it could mean that it won't work in the way that you intend it, but they found a way to continue to make it work. So I think it's a complex situation, but don't give up because of discouragement.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So we have another question from Cassie. She asked, what are some of the mistakes that you have made or see being made as a first-time entrepreneur?
Well, there's a lot of them, and that's why I wrote those books, because I kept track of them. I never intended to write books, but I was looking for, how do I record all the things that have happened? So a few of them are, and they evolve around raising money, because if you don't have any money to be able to do what you're doing, you can't do it, whether it's from a grant, whether it's from an investor. And one of the things about raising money, it always takes longer than you think. I'm currently working on a $22 million raise for the next round for this company, and it's probably taking about 6 to 8 months longer than we expected. And with that, if you don't have ways to sustain yourself, you might run out of money and capital and not be able to get to the next round of capital. So making sure that you plan a long enough time, you learn from others and help how to raise money, and you raise money that you only need in order to get to the next value enhancing milestone. That's one thing. The other is to remember that you need to have backup plans. Often we just think, hey, this is going to work, we're going to go do this. You need to have alternative plans in the back of your mind or written down. If this happens, then, or this doesn't happen, here's the options that I have to do, because you can get to a dead end. And if you get to a dead end, then you really can't do anything at that point. So I would say those two are probably two that people tend not to think about when they actually work on building a company.
But I'm wondering, how did you raise funds for your venture?
Yes. So the
How did you do
way,
it?
yes. So in my book, I have several chapters on how and who to go to, but the short answer is it's dependent upon the amount that you need. So in the beginning, you raise smaller amounts. You can raise those from friends and family and what they call angel investors. And you do it by putting together a pitch deck. And on my LinkedIn, I have a slide sort of template that you can use, but you actually share, just like in the Eiffel Tower story, you share the vision of what it's going to look like. You share what the value is, how it's going to benefit people, and you explain that. And then you go pitching it. I have probably give over 800 investor pitches in my 30 plus years. 95% of those were no thank you. So it's the 5% that you learn, you look for, and you learn from the 95% how to improve and how to change.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Mm-hmm.
So we have another question from Wei Jian in the chat. He said, did you meet people that have helped you, and how did they help you?
In my career, unfortunately, I did not have what we would call mentors. And this is part of the reason I wrote the books and part of the reason why I've actually been involved in helping to start up mentorship programs. Your program here that you're doing here is things that didn't exist when I was starting out. By meeting other people and helping other people helping you, and learning from each other is a very, very important method to be able to do that. So I would say I did not have that. And because I did not have that, it is the genesis of why I wrote the books, to help other people. And I have helped start up and even mentored many, many individuals, including professors and doctors and students. And that's the other reason I teach at the university. So it is very important that you find many different people that help what you might, they may not like to be called mentors, but they may just be people who give you some thoughts and advice. And you have them in different areas. Some of them are for business, some of them are for science, some of them are personal, some of them are other for relationships, but you need to have many of them. And I also have a chapter on why you need mentors in my book also.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the wonderful explanation. And we have another question from Shalista. She asked, how do we retrain our eyes to see opportunities when we are working with fundamental science, which seems to be very far away from direct application to patients?
Yes, that's a very, very good, important question, because that's the difference between looking at maybe a set of experiments and not looking far enough down the road as to what that can lead to. This is one of the things, if you will begin to continue to look for with eyes of business and science. Science is really many of these things where you solve experimental problems and you keep doing them and you continue to learn new things. The business application is, what could this mean and what could this do? And this is one of the areas in which many scientists don't do well. And it's something that you should train yourself to begin to think of the long-term applications and what it could mean. And the only way you can do that is learning a lot about business and medicine in addition to just the science. So I'll use one explanation. A scientist that might discover something that stops cells from growing in the cell cycle control mechanism, like a checkpoint inhibitor. They may think, well, they made this great discovery, and next door I've got a surgeon who has like 100 breast cancer samples in their freezer. So I'm going to start working on taking this discovery and applying it to the samples that are conveniently located next door to me. Never mind that there are like 55 treatments for breast cancer, but there are none for glioblastoma. And if they would apply it to glioblastoma, then the barrier to entry or approval could be survival for an additional 3 to 5 to 6 months. Versus if they applied it to breast cancer, the barrier for approval would be, how much longer does the patient survive during their lifetime over all the other drugs? So that's a different barrier to entry. That's a different application that has a lower barrier to entry. And if they would have started out applying it to a different application, the same technology, there might have been a bigger and a different business proposition or an interest, because there's not that amount of competition. So that's one little example of how you take something and look farther down the road as to the market application. So I would encourage people also to understand business and understand the market needs of business, because then you can direct the science towards it.
Yeah, I do agree with your answer. And so due to time constraint, we will take the last 2 questions in the chat. So Nasmi asked, do you think there's a characteristic that we need to have to become a good bio entrepreneur?
Yes, and again, I refer to the book. I have 10 plus characteristics that I placed in there, but I'm going to tell you just 2 of them here, because I've already mentioned a few, like perseverance and being able to solve problems. One is being aware of what I call the unknown unknowns. So an unknown unknown is something you don't know that you don't know, okay? We generally know what areas we don't understand. Say, I don't understand accounting, I will go get someone to help me with accounting. I don't understand regulatory, I'll get someone to help with regulatory. But there are many things that we don't even know that we don't know. And this has happened to many companies because they begin to develop something and they miss, oh, there's a regulatory requirement that I can't really manufacture something in this area, in this facility, without getting it approved first by the FDA. Then they have to redo their clinical trials. It's something they didn't know that they didn't know. And the way you can solve that is by getting advice from lots of people in different disciplines, so that you become aware of issues that you didn't even know that you didn't know. That's one. The other is to look for working with people with common core values. So in other words, sometimes we look to work with people who are just like us, that they have the same characteristic, the desires, maybe the same qualities. They're easy to talk to. We can do that. I'm not advocating just looking at people because of diversity. What I'm saying is you have to have common core values, but they need to have diverse backgrounds. So in other words, they still value that they honor each other. They still value that they will continue to do something and not put work on people that they don't really believe that they should do, that they value honesty and integrity. So if you have common core values and you make decisions that are difficult, then what you're going to do is come up with good solutions because people will have different backgrounds. But if you don't have common core values, you're going to have difficulties with your co-founders. You're going to have difficulty with either employees, with people you work with, because they don't believe the same things that you believe. So that's two of the important characteristics that I'll just bring up.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful explanation. And we have another question from Shalista again. She asked, how do you balance being in both academia and industry by your entrepreneurship? And how do you maintain those networks?
Yeah, so to some people, it might seem hard. It's something that, again, pursue your passions. I enjoy business and I enjoy teaching as well as learning how things work. And I enjoy creating things that don't exist. So you might think of business and science. And when you do something that you love and you enjoy, it's never work to try to do it. Now, you have to find and you have to train yourself to learn some things, but you need to find within those areas the things that you enjoy about it. Because if you enjoy it, you will do it very well. And if you do it very well, you will be very successful in that area and people will seek you out. It's when you do things that you really hate, or you don't learn how to find elements in those areas that are necessary in order to be able to make them appealing to you. So yes, it's always very busy, lots of things to do, but it's things that I enjoy doing. So as long as you do that, then you will never have difficulty with that. You'll have trouble finding time, but you will have to reduce some of the things you do, but it's not because it's a challenge, it's because you have to also be very well organized.
Yeah, that is a good answer. And to wrap up the session, we will take the final question from Yingfei. She asked, how do we identify and reach out to people for mentorship?
Yes, that's a good question. And it always begins with a relationship. So people also need to know that you have interest in them. So if there are people that you meet in your area, you need to also ask them questions about how they became what they've done, how they do what they do. Ask them technical questions in their field. Often people will like to share information that they know because it also helps them feel like they're an expert at something. And as you do that, and there becomes what we call a little camaraderie or a bond, then you can say, okay, can I go out and take you, buy coffee for you, or take you to lunch and ask you a few questions? And these are informal interactions. It's a little different if you say, hey, I just met this person. Would you be my mentor? They probably will run away because they don't know who you are. They don't really want this obligation and responsibility. But if you ask them questions and you get to learn about them and you ask them and do something that's nice for them, they will be a quote unquote mentor, but maybe not in the formal sense. Now, there are many programs, and we have started a couple of them that have formal mentorships. And you can look for those too, because people have gotten into those because they want to be a mentor or they want to be what we call a mentee. So those are important to look for too. But there are a lot of people in life who aren't formal mentors, but they actually are mentoring people.
Okay, so that's the end of today's webinar. It was a great honor to hear from Dr. Shimasaki to share his experience with us, and to all our audience from all over the UK and Malaysia. I'm sure there's now an extra career option for you. So with that, I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.